how did you begin to figure out the resources for who you were going to interview and vet them for not just, the quality of material, but also their backgrounds and what they could offer for this project?
Yeah, it's a great question because when you take on a project like this, I felt really passionately about making sure the smartest minds and voices in the women's health space were included in this book. I also really wanted to make sure it wasn't just jammed with the latest research, because as we know, research changes all the time. What I really wanted was for this to be a narrative reference. You're going to read it like if you tuck into a chapter, hopefully I really aimed to make it conversational, easy to understand, but also filled with just a lot of background information that we can know about our bodies so we can best advocate for ourselves. So that was really my guiding light, my North Star in working on this is who can I talk to who can help me translate not only the new research, but just the background knowledge that most of us as women sadly don't get. I don't know about you, but my health class, it really left out a lot of key details.
Yeah, generationally and even currently. I mean, I don't have daughters, but I have sons, and I'm glad to say they come back and ask me questions, but it also reminds me how less of information than they're getting that I was hoping they were going to get. And I think it's just because you have to keep it safe. You have to kind of keep it not controversial. You don't want to run into trouble with parents. And so, I feel like this is such a needed resource for even kids in high school.
Yeah. And
all the way through.
I agree. And I think, I've given an early copy to my sister who has 2 young daughters. They're in their tweens, my nieces who I adore. And, she is like, gosh, Meghan, we didn't learn this. And puberty is different now for my girls than it was when we went through it. And I need a bit more of like an education to help guide them through this big transition. I gave a copy of this book to my niece, Sydney, who just graduated from college. And she was like, Maggie, I had no idea the clitoris looked like this. And she is in a biomedical major. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like even kids who are going into sciences in college aren't getting this information about our bodies, and I think that needs to change.
I think given that, it almost implies that we really don't have as good a conversation with our own bodies, actually. And we don't have sort of the platform of anatomy in a way that makes sense or is comfortable. Women aren't typically used to touching their bodies, even young girls, in terms of just the stigmas of a whole bunch of, societal and cultural, influences. So, what this book seems to do is it goes from soup to nuts. And you can tell me more and tell our audience more, but you're starting with anatomy and some of the very basics, but you're drawing in so many other modern day issues like mental health, like the gut microbiome, like depression and anxiety, and using psychedelics and understanding what just the terminology of everything is, so that we have a ability to have a conversation with people that we trust and healthcare practitioners. Am I right?
You are right. And Maria Shriver, when she commissioned me to write this book for her imprint, she said, I want a manifesto, Meghan. And when Maria Shriver asks you to write a manifesto, you end up with a 700-page book and interviewing over 100 female experts. But yes, exactly, Dr. Cohen, that is what I tried to do, because even as a health journalist, I realized at some point during the process, gosh, like I don't know this. And no, I'm not a doctor. I never went to medical school, but I have steeped myself in various women's health topics throughout the years. And I was ignoring my own symptoms, like my own menstrual health symptoms, for example, like very heavy periods. I was very anemic and just sort of chalked it up to one of the bummers of being female. So to your point, we don't touch our bodies. We don't necessarily talk about some of the most taboo topics that maybe fill us with a little bit of shame, or things that society tells us we should feel shame about. And so education really is power. The more we know, the more confident we feel. Well, first of all, the more we can trust ourselves and our symptoms, right? And understand, oh, this might be something that's off here. And then the more confident we can feel when we go to our doctors and say, I think something is wrong, and this is what's happening. We have the knowledge and the language we need to talk about our bodies as well.
Right. Language is so important, because if you can't come up with the words, the questions don't come out as easily. And so you're sort of giving people a whole language to be prepared and armed for their consultations with doctors when they're learning more. And even in this book you have a wonderful, section where you were talking about what are the questions you should be asking and how to ask and what to be thinking about, when you go in to see a healthcare practitioner of any kind to get something answered. You mentioned that you yourself had gone through some medical issues and that sort of led you down a different path of asking questions. Tell us a little bit about that story. And how, having gone through this book, where are you having gone through this several year journey to some of those same questions and concerns?
Yeah, I really realized that for many years I was ignoring a lot of my own symptoms, and I was doing the sadly common female thing of just saying like, I'll blame it on my hormones, I'll blame it on my period. It's just one of the quote unquote bummers of being female. I hemorrhage for a few days every month. Had anemia, turned out had a uterus full of fibroids, uterine fibroids. And so really when I really tucked into this book, I realized I have to start speaking in more specifics to my clinicians so that I'm sharing with them what's actually going on versus brushing it off. How are they going to know if they weren't feeling anything to run these extra tests? So I did ask some very specific questions. I got a vaginal ultrasound, and sure enough, I then had multiple appointments with surgeons to try to find the best surgeon for me to do this surgery, which it was looking like was going to be how to treat my case of fibroids. And you know what? In the process of this, a piece in the New York Times came out about how a lot of women who have hysterectomies don't actually know what organs are being removed. I interviewed Dr. Lauren Stryker, who's an incredible physician who has done countless hysterectomies in her day. And she said, you can think about hysterectomy a little like an a la carte menu. You can take different organs, you can do the surgery in different ways. And the more you know, if you're having conversations with your doctor about this thing, the surgery, the more you can say, well, what organs are you going to take? What type of surgeries do you do? What are my options based on the size of my fibroids and my uterus? So it was things like that. And actually in the course of doing this, interviewing doctors for myself, I talked to my mom who had a hysterectomy for the same reason, fibroids, they run in the family. And she said, Meg, I don't actually know exactly what organs were removed. She knows that her uterus is gone, but she doesn't know if she still has her tubes or her cervix. And that's pretty remarkable to me, So again, I think the more we know, the more we can ask smart questions and the more empowered we will feel, not only in taking care of ourselves, but in the care we seek out